It was one of those lazy Saturday afternoons when the sun hung high in the sky, casting golden rays over the bustling city park. The air smelled fresh, mixed with the faint aroma of blooming flowers and freshly cut grass. Families were scattered around, some picnicking under trees, kids chasing each other with laughter filling the air, and joggers weaving through paths lined with benches. Among them was a young woman sitting quietly in her wheelchair, near a shaded area by the lake. She had a sketchbook balanced on her lap, her pencil moving steadily as she captured the beauty of the scene before her. The girl, let's call her Priya, loved coming to this spot. It gave her peace, a rare escape from the noise of everyday life. Her wheelchair didn't stop her from enjoying the outdoors. Instead, it became part of who she was, something she had learned to embrace after a car accident years ago left her unable to walk. Today, she was lost in her art, sketching, the ducks gliding across the water and the ripples they created. For a moment, everything felt perfect, but perfection has a way of shattering unexpectedly. In the distance, the hum of engines broke the calm. A group of bikers roared into view, their motorcycles rumbling like thunder. They weren't supposed to be there. The path they sped down was clearly marked for pedestrians only, but they either ignored the signs or didn't care. Their loud presence startled people nearby, forcing them to step aside quickly to avoid being hit. Parents pulled their children closer while others muttered complaints under their breath. Priya barely noticed at first. She was too focused on finishing her drawing. But then, out of nowhere, one biker swerved dangerously close to her. He wore black leather gear, his arms covered in tattoos, and he looked more menacing than the rest. His bike skidded to a halt just inches away from her wheelchair. Startled, Priya dropped her pencil, her heart racing as she looked up at him. "What do you think you're doing?" he growled, glaring down at her. "You're blocking my way." Blocking his way? Priya blinked, confused. She was on the pedestrian path, minding her own business. Before she could respond, the biker leaned forward and grabbed the handles of her wheelchair without warning. In one swift motion, he lifted it off the ground and dumped her onto the grass beside the path. Priya landed awkwardly, her body jolting with pain as her hands instinctively braced against the impact. Her sketchbook fell beside her, its pages fluttering open. For a few seconds, time seemed to freeze. Priya stared at the ground, stunned, her cheeks burning with embarrassment and anger. Around her, people gasped, some covering their mouths in shock. No one moved to help immediately. Most stood frozen, unsure of what to do. The biker revved his engine loudly, laughing as if what he'd done was nothing more than a harmless prank. Then, with a final glance back at Priya lying helplessly on the grass, he sped off, disappearing into the crowd. That's when things changed. A tall figure stepped forward from among the onlookers, a police officer. He was patrolling the park that day, keeping an eye out for trouble. When he saw what happened, his jaw tightened and his pace quickened. Reaching Priya, he knelt beside her, his voice calm but firm. "Are you okay?" he asked, concern etched on his face. Priya nodded weakly, still trying to process what had just happened. The officer helped her sit up carefully, making sure she wasn't hurt too badly. Once he confirmed she was stable, he turned to the growing number of witnesses. "Did anyone see where that guy went?" he asked, already pulling out his radio to call for backup. What made this moment stand out wasn't just the fact that someone finally stepped in. It was who stepped in. This officer wasn't just any cop. He was someone who understood what it meant to feel powerless, to be treated unfairly because of how you looked or what you couldn't control. He knew what it was like to face prejudice, to have people underestimate you based on stereotypes. And seeing Priya tossed aside like trash stirred something deep inside him. As he began gathering details from witnesses, he promised himself one thing. Whoever that biker was, he wouldn't get away with this. Not today. Not ever. The officer, let's call him Raj, didn't waste a second. He knew how fast situations like this could spiral out of control if action wasn't taken immediately. Priya was still shaken, sitting on the grass with her hands trembling as she tried to collect herself. Raj stayed close, offering quiet reassurance while keeping an eye on the crowd around them. Some people lingered, whispering among themselves, while others had already started walking away, eager to distance themselves from the chaos. "Can you tell me what happened?" Raj asked gently, crouching beside her again. His tone was calm but firm, the kind that made you feel safe even when your world felt like it was falling apart. Priya hesitated for a moment, her voice barely above a whisper. I was just sitting here, drawing. I didn't do anything wrong, he just came out of nowhere and—" Her words trailed off as tears welled up in her eyes. She gestured toward the path where the biker had disappeared, her frustration and humiliation evident. Raj nodded, his expression softening. "You didn't deserve that," he said firmly. "And we're going to make sure he doesn't get away with it." With Priya's permission, Raj called for backup. Another officer arrived shortly after, along with paramedics who checked Priya for any injuries. Thankfully, aside from some scrapes and bruises, she seemed physically okay. But Raj could see the toll it had taken on her emotionally. She kept glancing at her overturned wheelchair which lay a few feet away, its wheels spinning uselessly in the air. It was more than just a piece of equipment. It was her independence, her freedom. Seeing it treated so carelessly must have felt like a direct attack on her dignity. While Priya was being tended to, Raj turned his attention to the witnesses. A small group had gathered, their faces etched with concern and anger. One elderly man wearing a faded baseball cap and leaning heavily on a cane stepped forward. "Officer," he said, his voice gravelly but clear, "I saw the whole thing. That guy was reckless. He shouldn't have been riding there in the first place." "Did you happen to catch anything specific?" Raj asked, pulling out his notebook. "Like what he looked like or which direction he went?" The old man nodded. "Yeah, I got a good look at him. Leather jacket, tattoos all over his arms. Looked like trouble if you ask me." Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, "Oh, and I snapped a picture of his license plate before he took off. Thought it might come in handy." Raj's eyes widened slightly. "You did? That's great. Can I see it?" The man pulled out his phone and handed it over. Sure enough, there was a blurry but readable photo of the motorcycle's license plate. Raj thanked him profusely, knowing this tiny detail could be the key to finding the biker. With the image saved, he continued questioning other witnesses, jotting down descriptions and piecing together the sequence of events. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the park, Raj returned to Priya. She was sitting upright now, though her posture was stiff, her knuckles white as she gripped the arms of her wheelchair. The paramedics had helped her back into it, but she still looked fragile, like a single gust of wind could knock her over. "We'll find him," Raj promised, kneeling beside her once more. "But I need your help. Are you willing to press charges?" Priya hesitated, biting her lip. The thought of facing the biker again terrified her. What if he came back? What if no one believed her? But then she remembered the way Raj had stood by her side, the way he hadn't hesitated to step in when everyone else froze. Maybe she wasn't as alone as she felt. "I'll do it," she said finally, her voice stronger than before. "He can't just treat people like that and walk away." Raj smiled faintly, a look of admiration crossing his face. "Good. Because this isn't just about you. It's about sending a message. No one deserves to be treated the way he treated you." Back at the station, Raj wasted no time. He uploaded the license plate photo and ran it through the system. Within minutes, they had a match. A man with a string of minor offenses, mostly traffic violations and public disturbances. His name was listed as Arjun, though most people knew him by his nickname, Blaze. From the records, it was clear Blaze wasn't exactly a model citizen. He had a history of reckless behavior, including several complaints filed against him for aggressive driving and property damage. Armed with this information, Raj assembled a team to track Blaze down. They found his address, a dingy garage apartment, tucked away in a rough part of town, and prepared to bring him in. As they drove through the narrow streets, Raj couldn't shake the image of Priya lying on the grass, humiliated and vulnerable. He clenched his jaw, determined not to let Blaze slip through the cracks. When they arrived, the scene outside Blaze's place was chaotic. Loud music blared from inside, and the smell of oil and grease hung heavy in the air. Blaze himself was standing in front of the garage tinkering with his motorcycle. He barely glanced up as the police car pulled in, too focused on adjusting the bike's handlebars to notice the officers approaching. "Arjun Kumar?" Raj called out, his voice cutting through the noise. Blaze looked up startled, then smirked when he realized who was addressing him. "What's this about?" he asked, wiping his greasy hands on a rag. "You guys got nothing better to do than harass me?" Raj ignored the attitude, stepping closer. "We're here about an incident earlier today. You were seen speeding through a pedestrian area in the park and assaulting a young woman in a wheelchair." Blaze laughed, shaking his head. "Assault? Nah, man. She was blocking my path. I just moved her out of the way. No big deal." "No big deal?" Raj repeated, his voice hardening. "You think dumping someone onto the ground is no big deal? That's assault and you're coming with us." Blaze's smirk faltered, replaced by a scowl. "You serious right now? For that? Come on, don't waste my time." But Raj wasn't backing down. He signaled to his team, who moved in to detain Blaze. Predictably, Blaze resisted, shouting insults and trying to pull away. It took all of Raj's training to subdue him, but eventually Blaze was handcuffed and shoved into the back of the patrol car, still spouting threats and curses. As they drove away, Raj allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction. This wasn't just about catching a criminal. It was about standing up for someone who couldn't stand up for herself. And as far as he was concerned, justice was only beginning. The ride back to the station was tense, to say the least. Blaze sat in the back seat of the patrol car, his hands cuffed behind him, glaring out the window like a caged animal. Every few minutes he'd mutter something under his breath, half insults, half threats, but Raj didn't engage. He kept his focus on the road ahead, his jaw tight as he replayed the events of the day in his mind. The image of Priya lying helplessly on the grass wouldn't leave him alone. It wasn't just about catching Blaze. It was about making sure people like him understood that actions had consequences. When they arrived at the station, Blaze was brought inside and placed in an interrogation room. The space was small, with bare white walls and a single table surrounded by metal chairs bolted to the floor. Raj stood outside for a moment, watching through the two-way mirror as Blaze slumped into one of the chairs, his legs stretched out, defiantly. Despite being caught red-handed, the guy still carried himself like he hadn't done anything wrong. His cockiness grated on Raj's nerves, but he knew better than to let emotions take over. This wasn't personal, it was justice. Taking a deep breath, Raj entered the room, closing the door firmly behind him. He pulled out a chair across from Blaze and sat down, setting a folder on the table between them. Inside were copies of the witness statements, the photo of the license plate, and surveillance footage from nearby businesses that confirmed Blaze's presence in the park earlier that day. Raj opened the folder slowly, deliberately, letting the sound of papers rustling fill the silence. "All right," Raj began, leaning forward slightly. "Let's talk about what happened today." Blaze rolled his eyes, tilting his head back against the wall. "What's there to talk about? I already told you I moved her out of my way, end of story." Raj nodded, keeping his tone even. "Okay, so you admit to moving her. Can you explain why you thought dumping someone onto the ground was necessary?" "Necessary?" Blaze scoffed, sitting up straighter now. "Look, man, she was blocking the path. I wasn't going to wait around while some cripple slowed me down. You ever been stuck behind someone who can't move fast enough? It's annoying." The word hit Raj like a punch to the gut. Cripple. Even though Blaze said it casually, like it meant nothing, Raj felt his blood boil. He clenched his fists under the table, forcing himself to stay calm. Losing his temper wouldn't help anyone. Not Priya, not the case, and certainly not the message he wanted to send. "That cripple, as you call her, has a name," Raj replied, his voice low but sharp. "And regardless of how you feel about her or anyone else, your actions crossed a line. You assaulted her, that's a crime." Blaze leaned forward, his smirk returning. "Assault? Seriously? Come on, man, you're blowing this way out of proportion." "She's fine, isn't she? No harm done." "No harm done? Raj repeated, raising an eyebrow. You humiliated her in front of dozens of people. You left her lying on the ground, injured and scared. And you think that's okay? Blaze shrugged, clearly unbothered. People need to toughen up. Life's not fair. Get used to it. Raj stared at him for a long moment, trying to understand how someone could be so indifferent to another person's pain. Finally, he leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. You know what? Let's cut to the chase. We've got witnesses who saw everything. We've got video footage placing you at the scene. And we've got evidence proving you knew exactly what you were doing. Denying it won't change anything. For the first time, Blaze's confidence wavered. His smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. What are you saying? You want to throw me in jail over this? Over some chick in a wheelchair? It's not about the wheelchair, Raj shot back, his voice firm. It's about respect. It's about treating people like human beings, no matter who they are or what challenges they face. What you did wasn't just reckless, it was cruel. And cruelty has consequences. Blaze opened his mouth to argue but stopped himself. Instead, he sank back into his chair, his bravado fading. For all his bluster, he must have realized he was cornered. There was no denying the evidence stacked against him. As the interrogation continued, Raj methodically went over each detail, making sure Blaze understood the gravity of his actions. By the end of it, Blaze had gone from smug and defiant to restless and uneasy. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, avoiding eye contact as Raj outlined the charges. Aggravated assault, reckless endangerment, and violating traffic laws. Each charge added weight to the situation, leaving Blaze with fewer excuses. After hours of questioning, Raj finally stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. You'll have your chance to explain yourself in court, he said, gathering the folder from the table. But until then, you're staying here. As Blaze was led away to a holding cell, Raj stepped outside, exhaling deeply. The confrontation had drained him both physically and emotionally. He hated dealing with people like Blaze, those who seemed incapable of empathy or remorse. But he reminded himself why he did this job every day. It wasn't just about enforcing laws, it was about protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. People like Priya. Later that evening, Raj called Priya to update her on the progress. She answered hesitantly, her voice soft and unsure. Did you catch him? She asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. We did, Raj replied, allowing himself a small smile. He's in custody now and we're pressing charges. You don't have to worry about him coming after you again. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then quietly, Priya said, Thank you. I don't know what I would have done without you. You don't have to thank me, Raj assured her. This is what I'm here for. But listen, you're stronger than you think. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise. Priya didn't respond right away, but when she did, her voice carried a hint of determination. I won't, she said firmly. Not anymore. Hanging up the phone, Raj felt a sense of relief wash over him. Catching Blaze was only part of the battle. The real victory would come when Priya found her voice again, when she realized she wasn't defined by what happened to her that day. Justice might take time, but Raj knew one thing for sure. Blaze wouldn't forget this lesson anytime soon. As the night wore on, Raj sat at his desk, reviewing the case file one last time. Outside, the city buzzed with life, oblivious to the drama unfolding within the station walls. Somewhere out there, Priya was probably settling into bed. Replay world Changji. The days following Blaze's arrest were a whirlwind of emotions for Priya. She couldn't stop replaying the incident in her mind. The sound of the motorcycle engine revving, the way her wheelchair tipped over, and the humiliation of being left on the ground like an obstacle to be discarded. But amidst all the pain and anger, there was also something new. A flicker of determination. Raj had planted that spark during their phone call, reminding her that she was stronger than she thought. And slowly, Priya began to believe it. Priya spent hours reflecting on what had happened. At first, she felt small, like the world had reminded her once again of how vulnerable she was. But as the days passed, she started seeing things differently. What if this wasn't just about her? What if sharing her story could help others who felt powerless or invisible? The idea scared her. Public speaking wasn't exactly her thing, but the more she thought about it, the more it made sense. If silence let people like Blaze get away with cruelty, then maybe speaking up could make a difference. One evening, while sitting at her kitchen table surrounded by sketches and notes, Priya decided to write down her thoughts. She grabbed a blank notebook and began pouring her feelings onto the page. At first, the words came haltingly, but soon they flowed freely. She wrote about the fear she felt when Blaze approached her, the shock of being tossed aside, and the kindness Raj showed her afterward. She described how it felt to be treated as less than human, and why everyone deserved respect no matter their abilities or circumstances. By the time she finished, Priya realized she'd written something powerful, not just for herself, but for anyone who needed to hear it. With Raj's encouragement, she agreed to share her statement publicly. He helped her connect with local advocacy groups, who offered to amplify her voice through social media and community events. Within days, her story went viral. People from all over the city and even beyond reached out to express their support. Some shared similar experiences of feeling dismissed or mistreated because of disabilities. Others simply thanked her for having the courage to speak out. For Priya, the response was overwhelming but validating. For so long, she'd carried the weight of that day alone, believing it was her fault somehow. Now she saw clearly that it wasn't. It was Blaze's actions and the attitudes behind them that were wrong. Sharing her story didn't erase the pain, but it gave her a sense of purpose. She wasn't just a victim anymore, she was a survivor, someone willing to stand up and say, "This isn't okay." Meanwhile, preparations for Blaze's trial were underway. The prosecution team worked closely with Raj to build a solid case. They gathered witness testimonies, including the elderly man whose photo of the license plate had been crucial. Surveillance footage from nearby businesses painted a damning picture of Blaze speeding recklessly through the park before targeting Priya. Even his own cavalier attitude during the interrogation became evidence against him, highlighting his lack of remorse. As the trial date approached, Priya faced another challenge, testifying in court. The thought terrified her. Facing Blaze again would be hard enough, but standing in front of a room full of strangers and recounting the most humiliating moment of her life, it seemed impossible. Yet, every time doubt crept in, she remembered Raj's words. "You're stronger than you think." To prepare, Priya practiced reading her statement aloud, sometimes in front of a mirror, other times to close friends who encouraged her. Raj visited her a few times too, offering guidance and reassurance. "Just focus on telling your truth," he told her. "That's all anyone can ask of you." On the morning of the trial, Priya woke up early, her stomach churning with nerves. She dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that made her feel confident yet comfortable. As she wheeled herself into the courtroom, she noticed the sea of faces watching her, reporters scribbling notes, curious onlookers, and Blaze himself. Sitting smug, noise of chatter filled the air, but Priya kept her eyes forward, focusing on the task ahead. When it was her turn to speak, Priya took a deep breath and rolled her wheelchair to the witness stand. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the microphone, but her voice remained steady. Looking directly at Blaze, she began reading her statement. "You might think what you did to me doesn't matter," she said, her tone calm but firm. "But it does. You didn't just hurt me physically. You tried to take away my dignity. You treated me like I was worthless, like I didn't belong in that park or anywhere else. But here's the thing. I do belong. So do millions of others, like me, who face challenges every single day. We deserve respect, not cruelty." Her words hung in the air, heavy with emotion. The courtroom fell silent, everyone listening intently. Even Blaze seemed taken aback, his usual smirk replaced by a look of discomfort. When Priya finished, she lowered the paper and exhaled, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. Whatever the verdict, she knew she'd done what she set out to do, reclaim her voice. Afterward, Raj found her outside the courthouse. "You were incredible in there," he said, smiling warmly. I'm proud of you. Priya smiled back, though tears glistened in her eyes. Thank you, she said softly. I couldn't have done it without your support. Raj shook his head. It wasn't me. It was always you. You found your strength when it mattered most. As they parted ways, Priya felt a renewed sense of hope. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would still be bad days, moments of self-doubt, and reminders of how unfair the world could be. But she also knew she wasn't alone. Through her courage, she'd inspired countless others to stand up for themselves and demand better. And in doing so, she'd turned a painful chapter of her life into something meaningful, a message of resilience and hope for anyone willing to listen. The courtroom was packed on the day of Blaze's sentencing. Reporters jostled for seats, cameras clicked incessantly, and murmurs filled the air as people waited for the judge to deliver the verdict. Priya sat near the front, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She'd done everything she could, shared her story, testified bravely, and stood up for herself. But now it was out of her hands. The decision rested with the jury and the judge. Blaze, meanwhile, sat at the defendant's table, his usual arrogance replaced by a nervous energy. He fidgeted with his cuffs, glancing around the room like he was searching for an escape route. For someone who had acted so carelessly before, he now looked uneasy, almost vulnerable. Maybe he finally understood the weight of what he'd done. Or maybe he just didn't like being under scrutiny. Either way, the transformation was noticeable. When the judge entered the room, everyone rose to their feet. The atmosphere shifted instantly, growing tense and quiet. As the proceedings began, the prosecution presented its closing arguments, summarizing the evidence against Blaze. Witness testimonies, surveillance footage, and Priya's powerful statement. They emphasized not just the physical act of assault, but also the broader implications of his behavior, the message it sent about how society treats people with disabilities. This isn't just about one person, the prosecutor said firmly. It's about holding individuals accountable when they dehumanize others. Blaze's lawyer tried to downplay the severity of the incident, arguing that it was a momentary lapse in judgment rather than a deliberate act of cruelty. But even his own client struggled to keep up appearances. When given the chance to speak, Blaze muttered a half-hearted apology, though it lacked sincerity. I didn't mean for things to go this far, he mumbled, avoiding eye contact with anyone in the room. It was clear he wasn't sorry for what he'd done. He was sorry he'd gotten caught. Finally, after hours of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict, guilty on all charges. A collective sigh of relief rippled through the courtroom. Priya felt tears welling up in her eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of validation. Justice had been served, not just for her, but for everyone who had ever felt dismissed or mistreated because of who they were. The judge delivered the sentence next, his tone stern and unwavering. Your actions showed a complete disregard for human dignity, he said, looking directly at Blaze. You targeted someone simply because you viewed them as an inconvenience. That kind of behavior has no place in our society. With that, he sentenced Blaze to several years in prison, along with mandatory anger management counseling and community service focused on disability awareness once released. As the gavel came down marking the end of the trial, Priya let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. It was over. Blaze would face consequences for what he'd done, and she could finally begin to move forward. But more importantly, the case had sparked conversations far beyond the courtroom walls. People across the city, and even beyond, were talking about accessibility, respect, and the importance of treating everyone with kindness regardless of their abilities. In the days following the trial, Priya became something of a local hero. Advocacy groups invited her to speak at events, schools asked her to share her story with students, and media outlets featured her as an example of resilience and courage. At first, the attention overwhelmed her. She wasn't used to being in awe. The spotlight and the thought of speaking to large crowds made her anxious, but every time she hesitated, she reminded herself why she was doing this. If sharing her experience could help even one person feel seen or inspire someone else to stand up for themselves, it would be worth it. One of the most memorable moments came during a community event hosted by a local disability rights organization. Priya wheeled herself onto the stage, greeted by applause from the audience. She smiled nervously, adjusting the microphone before beginning her speech. "When I first started sharing my story, I wasn't sure anyone would listen," she admitted. "But then I realized something important. Change doesn't happen unless we start talking about the hard stuff. We can't fix problems we're too afraid to acknowledge." She went on to describe how the incident had affected her, not just the humiliation and fear, but also the strength she discovered within herself. "For a long time, I thought my wheelchair defined me," she said. "But now I know it doesn't. What defines me is how I choose to respond to challenges, and I choose to keep moving forward." Her words resonated deeply with the audience. Some nodded in agreement, while others wiped away tears. Afterward, dozens of people lined up to thank her personally, sharing their own stories of overcoming adversity. Priya listened intently, nodding and smiling, grateful for the connection she felt with each person. Through it all, Raj stayed in touch, checking in regularly to see how Priya was doing. Their bond had grown stronger over the weeks, forged through shared experiences and mutual respect. One afternoon, as they sat together at a cafe catching up, Raj leaned back in his chair and smiled. "You've come a long way since that day in the park," he said. "I'm really proud of you." Priya chuckled softly, stirring her coffee. "Honestly, I don't think I'd have made it this far without your support. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself." "That's what good people do," Raj replied simply. "They lift each other up." As they parted ways later that evening, Priya couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed. From feeling powerless and invisible, she had found her voice and turned her pain into purpose. The journey hadn't been easy, and there were still moments of doubt, but she knew she was stronger for having faced them head-on. More than anything, she hoped her story would remind others that they weren't alone, that even in the darkest moments there was always a chance to rise again. Little did she know, her impact was only beginning. Across the city, people were inspired to take action, whether by advocating for better accessibility in public spaces or simply showing more compassion to those around them. Priya's courage had ignited a ripple effect, proving that one person truly could make a difference. And as she rolled home that night, the city lights twinkling above her, she allowed herself a small smile. Whatever the future held, she was ready to face it, one step at a time. Months had passed since the trial, and life in the city had settled into a new rhythm. The park where everything began was still bustling with activity, but now it carried a different energy. Families strolled along the paths, kids played tag near the swings, and joggers weaved through the trees. It felt like a place of peace again, a safe haven for everyone, no matter who they were or what challenges they faced. And that change didn't happen by accident. Priya stood at the edge of the park one sunny morning, her wheelchair parked beside her as she watched workers install a new sign near the entrance. The plaque gleamed in the sunlight, its words etched boldly, "A safe space for all." Below the title was an inscription dedicating the path to inclusivity and respect, honoring those who fought to ensure accessibility and dignity for everyone. It was a small gesture, but it meant the world to Priya, and to the countless others who would use the park in the years to come. The unveiling ceremony brought together people from all walks of life. Local leaders spoke about the importance of creating spaces where everyone felt welcome, while advocacy groups handed out flyers promoting disability awareness. Children ran around holding balloons, their laughter filling the air, while parents chatted nearby, sipping coffee and enjoying the sunshine. In the middle of it all, Priya sat quietly, taking it in. She couldn't help but smile as she noticed how many wheelchairs, walkers, and service dogs dotted the crowd. This wasn't just a celebration, it was proof that progress was possible when people came together. When it was her turn to speak, Priya rolled up to the microphone, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "This park is more than just a place," she began, looking out at the sea of faces before her. "It's a reminder that kindness matters, that respect isn't something we reserve for certain people. It's something we owe to everyone." She paused, glancing at the plaque behind her. I used to think my story ended the day I was thrown onto the grass. But today I know it's only part of a bigger picture. Every time someone chooses to stand up for another person, every time we make our communities more inclusive, we're writing a new chapter, one full of hope and possibility. Her words earned a round of applause, but the real magic happened afterward. As the crowd dispersed, strangers approached Priya to thank her, not just for her courage, but for inspiring them to do better. A young mother with a toddler in a stroller told her how much the improved ramp access meant to her family. An elderly man using a walker shared how he finally felt comfortable visiting the park without worrying about uneven paths. Even teenagers stopped by, promising to keep an eye out for anyone who might need help crossing the street or navigating obstacles. Among the well-wishers was Raj, the officer who had stood by Priya from the beginning. He stood off to the side, watching her interact with the crowd, a proud smile on his face. When she noticed him, she wheeled over and gestured for him to join her. "You should say a few words," she urged. "None of this would have happened without you." Raj shook his head modestly. "This isn't about me," he said. "It's about you and everyone here today. People coming together to create change, that's powerful stuff." "Still," Priya insisted, and eventually Raj relented. Stepping up to the mic, he addressed the crowd. "As a police officer, my job is to protect and serve," he said. "But sometimes protecting means more than enforcing laws. It means standing up for what's right even when it's hard. It means believing in people like Priya, who remind us that strength isn't about physical ability, it's about heart." His speech earned another wave of applause, but what stayed with Priya most was the way people lingered afterward, talking and connecting. For so long she'd felt invisible, like her presence didn't matter. Now, surrounded by friends, supporters, and strangers turned allies, she realized just how wrong she'd been. Her story hadn't just changed her. It had touched countless lives, sparking conversations and actions that would ripple outward for years to come. In the weeks that followed, Priya continued her work as an advocate, speaking at schools, community centers, and conferences. Each event brought new opportunities to share her message of resilience and inclusion. She also partnered with local organizations to push for policy changes, ensuring public spaces became more accessible and welcoming for everyone. From widened sidewalks to tactile paving for visually impaired individuals, these improvements may have seemed small on their own, but together they transformed the city into a place where no one had to feel left behind. One evening, as she sat on her porch sketching the sunset, Priya reflected on how far she'd come. The road hadn't been easy. There were moments of doubt, fear, and exhaustion, but she'd faced them all with courage. More importantly, she'd found purpose in her pain, turning a dark chapter of her life into something meaningful. She thought back to the girl in the park that fateful day, lying on the grass, humiliated and scared. If she could tell that version of herself anything, it would be this: "You'll get through this. You'll rise stronger than ever." As the stars began to twinkle above, Priya closed her sketchbook and smiled. The fight for equality and respect wasn't over. It might never truly end. But she knew she was part of something bigger than herself. Together, she and others like her were building a world where kindness outweighed cruelty, where compassion triumphed over indifference. And in that moment, she felt nothing but gratitude for the journey, for the people who supported her, and for the endless possibilities ahead. Slowly, she wheeled herself inside, ready to rest and recharge for whatever tomorrow might bring. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew one thing for sure: she wouldn't face them alone. Because in a world that often felt divided, she'd discovered something remarkable: the power of unity, empathy, and unwavering determination. And that, she realized, was worth fighting for.